Have you ever had those moments of frustration when you're sewing or working on a crafting project and you cannot find your scissors, your seam ripper, your clips, your pins, because they are somewhere in your sewing materials, on your table, maybe on the floor? I'm Jan Howell. Welcome to my channel, where I show you tips and tricks and things to make your sewing, crafting, and all your DIY projects a little easier. And I may even save you a little money. In this sewing tutorial today, I'm going to show you how to stop all that frustration by creating a sewing station mat. You'll be learning how to straight line quilt, which is really easy, how to apply bias tape, and perhaps some other sewing tips that maybe you haven't seen before. So make sure you watch the whole video and take note on those things that you may find helpful for your other sewing projects. The sewing station mat is quite easy to make. Most of my things are beginner sewing projects, and you can always, of course, ask questions if you need to in the comments section below. If you're finding my content helpful and useful, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. So let's get started and let me show you what it's all about. Let's go over the materials and items that you'll need for the project. You'll need some fabric. You'll need a front piece and a back piece for the mat. You'll need a contrasting color for the pocket. We'll be quilting these panels, and so you will need some kind of batting. I really like to use the fusible fleece, or you can use just a piece of cotton batting. You'll need some kind of spray fabric glue. I've been using this and it seems to work great. A cutting mat and a cutting ruler and your rotary cutter. Now, of course, if you don't have these things, you can use a pair of scissors, but to get these straight angles, straight edges, I really do like using a rotary cutter and a mat and a ruler. You'll need some bias tape. You'll need some pins, or my favorite thing to use, of course, are these fabric clips. Some matching thread, your sewing machine, an ironing board, a measuring tape. It's always handy to have a seam ripper available. We all make mistakes and you may end up using this, which is not a big deal. Some kind of fabric marking pen. There are the heat marking pens that will go away once you apply heat. There are chalk pens. There are water soluble markers. Grab an old towel or a big sheet of paper so you don't get your spray adhesive all over your working surface. Let's go over how to make the sewing station mat, and we'll go over the measurements of the pieces of fabric that you'll need. Now, I have pre-cut these. I have used my rotary cutter and my ruler to cut out these pieces. If you want some suggestions on how to square up your fabric, I have a tutorial on that, but we're not going to go over all those details now. I have cut out my fabric, the main panel piece. So I have decided on this piece for the front, this piece for the backing, and we are going to make a fabric sandwich and quilt this all together with the batting in the middle. Now, I'm making my back piece a little bit larger than my front piece, just so, for the fact that as we quilt and do some work on it, sometimes it shifts, and then we'll be trimming off some of the edges to size. You'll need a backing fabric, which will be cut to 23 by 27.5 inches. The front piece, cut that to 22 by 26.5 inches, and the batting piece will be the same as the front piece, which will be 22 by 26.5 inches. So I've cut those out. I'm using this bright colored fun piece for the front pocket, and you'll cut that fabric panel 21 by 12 inches. And you'll need a 12 by 6 piece of batting or fusible fleece. So the first thing that we'll do is make a fabric sandwich. I'm going to take my back piece, place it right side facing down, take the fusible fleece with the bumpy side facing down. Now remember, this is going to be just a little bit smaller, and it doesn't have to line up perfectly because we are going to be trimming it down to size, like I said. Now, as you notice, I did not have a piece. I have a bigger piece, but I didn't want to waste these smaller pieces when I could use this. And I wanted to show you that you can use multiple pieces and it won't make a big difference as long as you're covering the fabric. I'm just going to line those up, and this little piece I'm using can go there. As you can see, it's a little bit bigger, no worries right now. If you are using batting that doesn't have a fusible side to it, you will want to spray the back of it with your adhesive first. Smooth that out and then take it to the ironing board and press that in place. You want to make sure that this is not, that the fusible bumps are facing down, otherwise you'll have a big mess on your iron. See how I'm just kind of pressing it down? I'm not like rolling it back and forth. So once I get that tacked down, I'll be able to flip it over and press on the fabric side, which, as you can see, this doesn't glide or iron as smoothly as if I'm ironing from the fabric side. But I want to get it tacked down so I can make sure that I'm covering all of the fabric. Flip that over, smooth it out, and then give it a good press. Okay, I'm going to set that back side aside for a minute while I spray glue my front piece. You don't want this glue getting on your work surface because it can be really challenging to get off. Let's finish making our sandwich here. And if you'll smooth from the center out, that kind of helps keep getting those wrinkles from forming. That feels nice and smooth. I'm going to get rid of my towel. This is where you're going to learn how to do a little bit of straight line quilting. You can just do free form, like just quilt it, which is really fun to do. And we'll go over that in another tutorial. But for today, we're just going to make some lines and follow those lines. Let's talk just a minute about the marking pens. Of course, you can just use a chalk pen. There are heat activated markers, which I hear sometimes will not come out on some quilting fabrics. So you want to test that out first if you do use these. They're nice, they're very pointy. I have a set I use myself, and when you iron the item, it disappears. Or you have this marker right here, which is very inexpensive. You can get it at Walmart, you can get it at most fabric stores. Now this blue end is a water-soluble ink that will, once you spray it with a sprayer or water, it will disappear. So because of the color of this fabric, I found that the water-soluble blue ink wasn't showing up so great on this fabric. And with my eyes like they are, I like to have something that I can see clearly. So I'm going to use the heat activated marker. I'm going to do diagonal lines both ways. And of course, this will be the most time-consuming part of the whole project. And I'm also going to show you a different method where you can use an attachment on your sewing machine, on your presser foot, that will act as a guideline as well. And I will show you that in the next method that I'll show you on the under table caddy. Get that 45-degree line. I'll find that diagonal line on my ruler, line it up with the edge of the fabric. I'm going to do 1.5 inch increments. You can do whatever you want. Now that I have marked all the lines going this way, I'm going to flip my ruler the other way, find that 45-degree line, and do the same process. Next thing, let's go ahead and take it to the sewing machine and sew on those quilting lines. You'll be using just a straight stitch. However, I am going to set my stitch length to a little bit longer of a stitch, from 2.5 to 3.0. I find that gives you a better top stitching and quilting stitch. There's no need to back stitch. I'm going to start in the middle, one of the middle lines. I'll start just outside of the top piece. If you have a walking foot attachment or one that comes on your machine, this little foot back here, let me show you how that works. On my machine, it's already part of the machine, and I just lower it down and put that in place. What that does is it feeds the top fabric through the same rate as the bottom feed dogs will pull the fabric through. That allows the fabric to go through the machine evenly. And so that if you're sewing on bulky fabric, by the time you get to the end, the top piece is going to be shorter than the bottom piece, or vice versa. That just works really well if you have that available. If you don't, no worries. I would recommend halfway through your sewing though is to line up the ends and make sure that they're staying in place. And sometimes you will need to hold the top fabric so it doesn't feed as fast as the bottom does. I'm using a blue thread to top stitch this, which might be a little bit hard for you to see. I'm using a blue thread underneath. If you were using like a different color on the bottom, like maybe a white or even a red, you could put a red thread in your bobbin on the bottom, or whatever color you wanted to. Just sew off that front piece, leave my needle down, and I'm going to rotate. So you're not having to cut and have a bunch of threads to clip. So it's like continuous sewing. I'm going to stitch down to that next line, leave your needle down, lift up your presser foot and pivot it, and sew down the next line. And you'll just continue. When I've done all these lines, I will do the other side and then do the cross section. All right, I have finished quilting that. Look how cute that turned out. And this is what it looks like on the back. I use that heat activated pen. I'll show you how fast and quick those lines disappear with the iron. Pretty snazzy, huh? Oh, I'm just really enjoying this sewing machine quilting. Now, what we're going to do is square up our edges and cut it to size. We're going to cut the mat 21 by 25 inches. The first thing that you'll do is take one edge, and if you have a stripe or something, you'll want to line up one of the edges with the stripe. So I'm going to look on the back here and see what we've got going. It looks like I have a pretty straight edge, and it is right now 26.5 inches. So we need to cut that down. So I'll find a good prominent line on that stripe. Give it a good straight edge cut. Then I'm going to measure out that 25.5 inches. And see, if we were trying to line up those edges and sew it, you wouldn't get this really nice straight edge by allowing that extra, inch to quilt it first. Now the width of the mat is going to be 21 inches. And since my ruler is not long enough, I have two straight edges that I can line up. Another way you can do that is use a horizontal line on the ruler and then make your cut. And this needs to be 21 inches. Okay, there's the sewing mat. I'm going to set that aside while do the same thing for the pocket piece. Now, for the pocket piece, I have designed this so you don't have to cut two pocket pieces. We'll just cut one, fold it in half. So that's the front and the back of the pocket. I'm going to fold that over and just crease that so I know where the halfway point is, where I need to put the fleece. I'm going to find my bumpy side of the fleece and just put it on half of it. And since this is such a small piece, I did not cut it bigger than the final measurement. Pretty much just tack it down and then spray this side with my glue. Then I'll fold the glue side over and give that a good press. Now you can decide if you want to quilt it the same way. I think I am going to do vertical lines down the front, and you could just top stitch this since it is on the fold, or you can use bias tape, which I am going to do. Now you can make these vertical lines the edge of your presser foot to use that as a guide. You could use your ruler. Just depends on how big you want those vertical lines to be. I think I'm going to try 1/2 inch lines. I like to start from the center, then move out, and then move out, just to make sure that I'm keeping things straight. You can line up one of those lines on the ruler. I'm going to start on some line in the middle and just start going at it. And since I am adding a bias tape at the top, I'm going to try that just stitching over to the next line, just so I don't have a bunch of threads to cut. This machine's kind of slow at stopping and starting, so let's try that method. That's looking pretty cute. Kind of hard to see that blue thread on this crazy fabric. So I'll continue that and catch up with you in just a minute. I have finished quilting the pocket piece. I'm going to trim down the sides and the bottom to make sure it's the right length. It needs to be 21 inches by 6 inches, and I can tell I have a little extra batting there on the bottom. Just a little sliver of that batting on a straight edge when we put the bias tape on. The next thing to do is apply some bias tape to the top of the pocket. Now, if you haven't seen my tutorial on how to make your own bias tape, you'll want to check that out, because look at the difference. If I were just to use a regular color and making your own bias tape, you can use polka dots. I have made bias tape with this crazy print that looks really cute on the next one that we're going to do. This is double fold bias tape. I'm going to give some extra at the end there, and I might as well go past that seam. And I'm going to line up the edges and sew down that folded crease. And then once we're finished with that, we'll flip it over to the front side and top stitch along just on an 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. Don't cut it to exact length. I like to give it a few inches extra just so you're safe. And I'll back stitch. Fold it over the top. And this is where I do use my fabric clips. Then I'm going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch from that folded edge right there. And you really don't need to back stitch, because we are going to be enclosing that end into the bias tape that we'll be applying on the side. My presser foot has a little red line right there where I'll put the edge of the fabric, and that will bring me over to 1/8 of an inch. You can always adjust your needle position if you want to help with that alignment. And if you want to add a label or a tag to your mat, this is the time to do that. I'm going to put a label just down here on the bottom pocket. I have folded the label in half. If you want to see a tutorial on how to make your own labels, you can go and watch that, it's really easy to do. But I'm going to baste that in place at this point. So the cut edges will be with the cut edge of the mat. I have to keep in, we're going to be applying bias tape around the edge, and so that will be about 1/2 inch away. So I'm going to place that about there and just baste really close to the edge. Okay, let's go to the table and put everything together. I'm going to clip off that excess bias tape on the ends. Place the wrong side of the pocket onto the right side of your mat. Line up the edges, clip it in place, And then using the template, we're going to make our pocket lines. You can adjust the pockets to suit whatever you want to put in the pockets. You can make it just 3 pockets, 2 pockets. I have found that 4-inch increments suits the things that I have. And then we will be making a little pin cushion here if you want to add that, and I'll show you how you can do that. I have a printable template with the pattern if you want to go ahead and get that. I'll put the link in the description below. If you do want to use the pocket template, you can print that out. It's easy to assemble. So again, this is just optional ideas. I'll have a place for my clips, a scissor pocket, a rotary pocket, my snips and my seam ripper, and another pair of scissors and a pin cushion. So I'm going to just center that on there using heat resistant pin, whatever. I'm going to mark those places and then use my ruler. And then to get these lines, it's 3.5 inches from the top. This is 4 inches from the top. I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew along those lines. So I know I've shared this before, but to keep from getting those loops or stray threads on the top or the bottom when you start to top stitch is to hold that top thread for the first few stitches. I'm going to bring my needle down just at the edge of the bias tape, and you'll want to back stitch 2 or 3 times to really reinforce that top of the pocket seam. I'm bringing my needle down right where I need it. I'm just going to turn my hand wheel towards me a few times to make sure that needle is going down where I want it to. Now, depending on what marker you used, you can either use an iron to heat activate those lines and get them rid of, or spray water on it. And I'm going to worry about that in just a minute. Now it's time to put on the bias tape. So you want to make sure that you have like 3 to 4 yards of bias tape for the whole project. Start sewing it to the back side first. So you'll find the middle part of the top. It doesn't have to be exact. I'm going to leave about 5 inches unsewn. And we'll be sewing mitered corners, which seems a little intimidating, but it's really easy to do, as I'll show you in just a second here. So I'm not going to pin the whole thing. I'm just going to go ahead and take it to the machine, make sure the edges are lined up, and sew that first edge. I am going to back stitch where I start and end my seam. I'm using a 3/8 inch seam allowance to sew the edge of my bias tape. A lot of people use a 1/4 inch. You can do that if you want to, but you want to, when you're doing these mitered corners, you want to come to the corner the same amount of your seam allowance. So this is 3/8. I'm going to stop at that point, the 3/8 inch point. You can mark that, or you can just eyeball it. You'll get so you can just eyeball it. So I'm going to sew down there to that point, and then I'm going to sew off at a corner. I'm going to bring my needle in the down position, lift up my presser foot and pivot and sew to the corner and off. Pivot your mat, fold the bias tape up onto itself like that. Then I'm going to fold it down onto itself, lining up the edge of the fold of the bias tape here, and make a fold at the top edge of the fabric and the mat, and aligning up this side. And then we'll just continue sewing. Just all the way around. And it is helpful if you have some table, or you can pull up a chair to let this rest on so it's not pulling as you sew. So make sure when you come to the pocket edge that that's all laying flat. You'll be sewing through several pieces of fabric right here. We're getting back to where we started. I have this portion unsewn. I have this bias tape tail and this bias tape tail. So I'm going to come down and then I'm going to back stitch. And then we're going to join them in the middle, but not sew it quite yet. Bring that end up, make sure you're not pulling it tight, and just let it lie there. And I'm going to put a pin. See how much I've left here open. Let's put a pin randomly there, and then place that flat. Bring the other end over the top of it. This black binding is kind of hard to see, and I've got seams here, and I don't want to have another seam in the same place as your binding seam. So I'm going to move that up a little bit. Put my pin in and see if that helps. We'll bring that over the top, and I'm going to mark with a pin where that pin is, a line right on top of that, and I'll mark a line where the pin is. And you're going to flip it, and using a straight edge or a ruler or something, or you can eyeball it, but I like to use the edge of my seam gauge there just to get a perpendicular line. And then I'm going to make a line at that other point where we marked. Bring those ends together, right side facing each other. So this is why you leave a place unsewn, so you can do this. We're going to find those lines that we made. So there's one, and there is the other one. Pin it in place. Make sure that the bias tape's unfolded and flat. And we're going to sew down that line there. Before I cut this off, I'm going to open that up and make sure it's the correct distance. There's no gaps, looks good. So now I can trim that off at 1/4 inch. Finger press your seam open and continue sewing. I like to overlap a little bit, back stitch. So your bias tape is joined, and we're ready to flip it and top stitch. Let's see how these mitered corners turned out. Clip any threads that you have. Take that folded edge, flip it to the front, and you'll want to cover that previous stitching. Fold that down to the end, flip the other side over to cover the seam, and that will give you the nice mitered corner. Clip that in place and just continue to clip around the whole mat. There are some people who would prefer to do this by hand using a slip stitch all the way around. I do quite enjoy that. Or I'm going to show you how you can just take it to the sewing machine and top stitch 1/8 of an inch all the way around. I like to bring the container that I hold my clips in to the sewing machine so that as I unclip, I can just put them in here. I'm going to start at the top middle part of the binding. So I'll take my few stitches there, back stitch, let go of the thread and continue sewing. I'm going to stitch up until my needle goes through the next piece of binding, and it's about the same distance from the edge there, and I'll pivot it and then bring my presser foot back down and continue to sew. We've applied the binding. It looks really sharp. Now if you want to add that little portion down at the bottom for a pincushion, take some fiberfill stuffing, you don't need very much, and stuff it down into the bottom there. I'm going to use my turning stick, the blunt end, so I can get into those corners. So what we're going to do is go to the sewing machine and just hold that down while I stitch across that line. And you'll want to pull it apart as you sew. I'm going to turn my hand wheel toward me so I can know where my needle is going to go down, and then bring my presser foot down. I'll take a couple stitches. I press that down as flat as I can and keep it pulled apart so it doesn't bunch up at this end. Now if you have that walking foot, it's going to make that easier. Otherwise, just go slow. All right, we have that little pillow there at the bottom. And when I bring that over to the iron and press that, that other line is going to disappear. And there you have it. Place the mat where you want it on your sewing surface. Take your machine. You can adjust it on there however you want. And look at all the pockets that I have available. This one, you can put some clips in there. Quite a few clips, actually. My fabric scissors, my rotary cutter, and the shorter pocket works really well for my little snips, my seam ripper. I like having a pair of paper scissors handy, my turning stick, and a pin if you wanted to right there on the end. A place to put a few pins as you take them out is always nice. No more hunting and wasting time searching for all your goods. I am really excited. You can put this wherever you want to. It stays nice and stable, and it's cute. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel if you're liking my content. Click the notification bell if you want to be updated when I put new things up. Check out my other video tutorial where I show you how to make a nifty under the table sewing caddy. It'll have some different variations. I'll be going over a few different machine quilting tips and techniques. Have a wonderful day, have fun sewing, and we'll see you in the next video.